Come closer. The shadows have missed you, and tonight they have a new story to tell. Welcome to Scary Stories After Dark. The sleepy town of Ghost Rest was wrapped in cheap plastic cobwebs and flickering jack-o'-lanterns. Orange lights buzzed on porches, paper skeletons swayed in the breeze, and the streets were slick with October mist. On Maple Hollow Road, a man named Dennis Calloway, plaid shirt half-buttoned, cigarette glowing between his lips, stumbled home from the bar. His boots dragged across cracked pavement as if the fog itself clung to his ankles. Behind him, the night shifted, leaves scraped, then crunched. Dennis paused, frowning into the dark. "Hey, who's there?" His words echoed hollow through the stillness. A growl answered, low, wet, hungry. His cigarette slipped from trembling fingers. He squinted into the fog, catching only the blur of a shape, a figure crouched low to the ground, its limbs jerking unnaturally, head cocked at a sickening angle. Eyes gleamed faint yellow from the mist. Then it lunged. Dennis didn't have time to scream. The thing slammed him against a tree, bones cracking on impact. His breath was stolen by claws ripping through his chest, warm blood painting the bark. He tried to shove it away, hands pressing against fur. Fur. The beast's jaws split too wide, teeth serrated and dripping, hot breath steaming against his face. The bite tore through his throat. His body spasmed, then went limp. The night swallowed the sound. And just like that, the shape slipped back into the fog, silent, almost graceful. As it disappeared, porch lights flickered on down the street, faintly illuminating a figure in shadow, a woman's silhouette walking steadily toward the quiet houses of Ghost Rest. The neon sign outside Banshee Beans and Arcade buzzed like a dying fly. Inside, the smell of burnt espresso clung to the air, tangled with the electronic beeps of Pac-Man and the warped chords of some old Misfits track bleeding from the jukebox. 4 teens huddled in the corner booth where the cracked vinyl seats squeaked every time someone shifted. Opal, with chipped black nail polish and eyeliner smudged like war paint, slurped a soda through a Twizzler straw. Blair lounged beside her, jean jacket collar popped, feet up on the table, flipping through a dog-eared Fangoria magazine. Across from them, Nico hammered buttons on a handheld console, muttering curses under his breath, while Hayes sat with arms crossed, staring blankly out the window. "Breaking news," Blair announced, smacking the magazine shut. "Town officially crowned most boring place in America. Our prize? Free funeral services at Calloway's mortuary." Nico didn't look up. "Nice. I'll save mine for prom night." Opal leaned forward, eyes sharp. "You guys didn't hear? Some dude got torn apart last night on Maple Hollow. Cops are saying it was an animal attack." Blair snorted. "Yeah, sure. Because wolves totally hang out behind the liquor store." Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "It's not funny." His voice was low, serious. The others glanced at him. Silence prickled. On the mounted TV above the counter, the local news flickered, grainy footage of flashing police lights, a body bag being wheeled away. The anchor's voice droned, "Brutal killing, no suspects. Residents urged to stay indoors after dark." The waitress slid by with a tray of stale muffins, mumbling, "Happy almost Halloween," as if the phrase were a curse. Behind her, a cluster of townsfolk whispered about blood on the sidewalks. Opal raised an eyebrow, grinning just enough to break the tension. Well, cheers to Ghost Rest, even our murders are low budget. Blair chuckled, but Hayes didn't join in. He kept staring out the window where plastic jack-o'-lanterns swayed on porches. For just a second, he thought he saw a shadow move between the houses, a shape too tall, too wrong. His stomach flipped. The arcade machine near the door went silent mid-game. The neon sign outside flickered, buzzing, then died. The diner dropped into sudden, suffocating dark. The neon snapped back to life like someone had yanked a leash. For a beat, the arcade hummed and everyone exhaled, until the exhale sounded wrong, brittle, like a laugh cut in half. "Power's greedy tonight," Nico grumbled, tapping his handheld until the screen lit. Seriously, Ghost Rest could lose electricity and nobody'd notice for a week. Blair knocked his knee against the table to make a point. "Hey, at least we have atmosphere. This place is basically a horror movie set that forgot to pay its lighting bill." Opal smirked, but when she glanced at Hayes, the smile froze. He wasn't watching them. He was watching the window, jaw tight. Outside, the street was slick with October mist. Porches glowed with fake candlelight. For the first time all evening, the town looked staged and sinister at once. Then a sound cut through, the kind of sound you don't hear in the daytime. A thin, ragged scrape from beyond the glass like cloth dragged over stone. Conversation stumbled and fell away. "Probably a raccoon," Blair offered too loud. "Not raccoon," Hayes said. He pulled his jacket tighter, the way someone tucks their hands into pockets when they don't want to admit they're cold. They stood up as one when a distant scream split the night. It wasn't cinematic, no movie scream with perfect pitch. This was raw and human and abruptly cut off. Something in the booth dropped like a hot skillet. A jar of toothpicks toppled and clattered like tiny bones. The jukebox hiccuped, spat a warped snippet of a synth line, then died. The arcade monitors flickered. The neon sign outside stuttered and went out again, not with a polite fade, but with a hard, punctured darkness that swallowed the street. Total blackout. Phones lit like constellations, shadows became knives. The teens' laughter evaporated. Someone hissed. "Stay put," it sounded small against the black. A faint tapping began from the other side of the front door, just 3 slow knocks, each one deliberate. The waitress froze, tray in hand. The old man at the counter muttered the Lord's name under his breath, and that didn't make it better. Opal reached silently for the baseball bat that hung behind the booth like a shrine. Hayes's hand hovered at her wrist, and she didn't pull away. The knocking stopped. Silence pushed in so tight the blood in their ears roared. Then, from somewhere outside, close, too close, a wet sliding sound. Someone dragged something along the pavement, a muffled thump. Then a rasp, like someone clearing a throat that was not quite human. From the far end of the counter, the payphone rang once, then again, a thin metallic sound under the hiss of the milk steamer. Hayes slid off his stool, coins clinking in his pocket. The receiver felt cold when he picked it up. A voice, his mother's, came through, warped and low. "Hayes, call me when you get in. I'm late. Love you." No timestamp, no number, just that calm that cut both ways. He set the receiver down slowly. "She's out of town," he said, small, brittle. She called this morning. Work. He tried to laugh, but it cracked like glass. At the same moment, a smear of something dark glazed the inside of the front window. At first it looked like rain, then it pooled and ran down in slow, deliberate streaks. Someone near the door whispered, "Is someone outside?" 3 soft, patient scratches answered, fingernails on wood, not a forced bang, not a desperate hammer, someone testing a latch. Hayes swallowed. His voice was small. "It's probably just..." He never finished. The scratching moved toward the back alley, then stopped. For a second, nothing moved at all. Then, far away but unmistakable, Hayes heard a voice that might have been his mother's singing a lullaby, low and wrong, bending in a key that made the hair on his arms stand up. The lights returned like a slap. Everything was back, absurdly normal. The neon buzzed, a pinball chimed, the jukebox spat out the opening riff of a cassette-era anthem. A man at the counter laughed too loudly, shaking off fear like an itch, and someone cracked a joke that landed like a dud. But on the windowsill by the front door, in the small pool of light, there was now a single muddy footprint. Big, deep, and at the edge of it, pressed so close to the glass the pattern of skin was visible, there were 2 tiny crescent marks, like teeth. Somewhere down Maple Hollow, a siren wailed once and then faded into nothing. The arcade smelled faintly of metal and coffee and the sharp aftertaste of fear. Hayes heard himself whisper, not sure whether he meant it for them or for himself. "She's coming home early." The room tilted. The night outside Banshee Beans and Arcade smelled like wet leaves and copper. Street lamps hummed but barely cut the mist. The teens stuck together, a pack of shadows moving down Maple Hollow. Nico kicked a crushed Coke can. This is how every slasher starts. Idiots walk into the fog. Cue ominous music. Blair shot him a look. "Then quit narrating our deaths, Spielberg." Opal tugged her jacket tighter. "At least if we die, we'll look cool. I'm calling dibs on the VHS cover." Hayes didn't laugh. His eyes tracked every porch light, every paper skeleton twitching in the breeze. He couldn't shake the sound of his mom's voice from that diner phone, sweet, familiar, bent wrong. Halfway down the block, they saw it. The sidewalk was slick with something dark. A streak led into the gutter, pooling under a storm drain. The metallic smell made Opal gag. "Blood," Hayes whispered. Blair crouched, holding a lighter for light. The flame jittered. A shoe sat half hidden in the weeds. Knot dropped, ripped away. The tongue of it was torn clean out, teeth marks punched through the leather. Nico's sarcasm cracked. Dogs don't do that. Above them, wind rattled cheap plastic bats strung between porches. One snapped loose, spiraling down. The kids flinched, and Hayes caught sight of something smeared on the nearest house's siding. A print, not human. Clawed. The kind of mark that gouged inward as if something wanted to climb inside. Blair's lighter sputtered out. Darkness closed in. Somewhere up ahead, a low hum rose, a sound like a woman humming a lullaby, almost pretty, almost soothing, but fractured, the same tune Hayes's mom used to sing when he was little. His stomach dropped. "We need to go. Now." but the sound was getting closer. Opal grabbed Hayes' arm. "Tell me that's not..." From the mist, a shape moved, too tall, jerking forward on limbs that bent wrong, yellow glints for eyes. The figure froze halfway down the street, watching. The teens didn't breathe. Then the shape leaned forward, just enough for the lamplight to catch. Long hair, a woman's frame, face hidden by shadow. "Mom!" Hayes' voice broke, raw and scared. The shape tilted its head, then it vanished into the fog, gone without a sound. Hayes' house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac like it was waiting. Plastic pumpkins lined the porch, grinning stupidly under a sagging string of orange lights. The place should have felt normal. It didn't. Inside, the living room smelled off. Not dust, not smoke, meat. Something raw. Opal wrinkled her nose. "Someone slaughter a cow in here?" Blair flicked on the lamp. It buzzed, stuttered, then steadied. The couch cushions were shredded, foam guts spilling like the aftermath of a fight. A picture frame hung crooked, the glass spider-webbed. "Nice home makeover," Nico muttered. "Martha Stewart meets chainsaw." Hayes' throat was dry. "It wasn't like this yesterday." They crept toward the kitchen. The fridge hummed too loud, straining. When Blair yanked it open, light spilled over shelves crammed with raw steaks, chicken, ribs, piles of meat stacked high, blood dripping into the vegetable drawers. Opal gagged. "She doesn't even cook." Nico's voice was sharp now, no sarcasm left. "Hayes, where's your mom getting all this?" Hayes shut the door too hard. The hum died. For a moment, the house felt dead, like it had swallowed the sound. Then, creak. From upstairs. They froze. Another step, slow, heavy. Floorboards groaning under weight that didn't move like human feet. Blair whispered, "She's home." The humming started again, that same lullaby Hayes remembered from childhood, only now warped, dragging, threaded with a low growl. Hayes' hands trembled. He whispered, "That's her." The humming grew louder, closer, moving toward the stairs. The teens bolted for the front door. Hayes fumbled the lock, heart hammering. Behind them, the stairs creaked once more, then silence. Opal yanked Hayes out onto the porch just as the upstairs light flicked on. Through the window, a shadow crossed slowly past the curtain, tall, hunched, wrong. Blair's voice shook. "We need proof, something to make people believe us." Nico swallowed. "Or we're next." The porch light flickered, then went out. They split up because panic doesn't wait politely for plans. The town was waking into rumor and alarm, sirens threaded through static on car radios, and Ghost Rest's usual cheerful kitsch looked obscene. Inflatable ghouls swaying over caution tape, kids' paper masks smeared with the real thing. News vans crowded Main Street like vultures with satellite dishes. Opal, Blair, and Nico moved like thieves, while Hayes' hands shook with a feverish motion. He didn't trust himself to be alone. They started at the obvious places, the liquor store alley, the boarded-up playground, the old slaughterhouse that teenagers dared each other to trespass in. Each place left a different kind of dark on their souls. At the slaughterhouse, Opal found fur caught in the chain-link fence, matted, coarse, black with gore. She wrapped it in wax paper from a vending machine gum wrapper like it was evidence from a crime show. Precious and disgusting. "This is not raccoon," she said, voice flat. Blair forced a grin. "Unless we've been gentrified by an evil raccoon." They turned up a cracked VHS tape behind a stack of rusted cages. Someone had dropped the tape, its label scrawled Halloween '94, Party in messy ink. When Nico jammed it into an old VCR hunk in the back of the arcade, the screen showed nothing but static, then a frame, a shadow moving too fast, a smear of motion that ended with a flash of teeth. The tape snapped in the VCR like a broken jaw, the clues threaded together like a noose. A pattern emerged: shredded clothing, deep gouge marks, kitchen knives missing from restaurant drawers, and animals, pets gone, collars snagged on fences. They headed back to Hayes's block because it was the point where everything crooked inward. The cul-de-sac was humming with lights from cruisers, neighbors' cars blocking off the road like a makeshift fortress. People shouted at each other from porches, pitching accusations as though words could fix ripping things apart. Hayes led them past his own porch, stomach flipping. He couldn't stop looking at the night sky, at the moon clouded by fog like a coin behind gauze. He felt raw and hollow and small. They checked the back alley behind Hayes's house where the first smear had started. A smear of dark on the brick, a few tufts of hair stuck to the drain pipe. Hayes's breath came fast. He found a scrap of fabric snagged on a nail, a tiny piece of his mother's favorite scarf. He held it until his fingers went numb. "Proof," Opal whispered. "We bring this to the sheriff. They actually might do something." They trudged toward Calloway's, a place they all knew for funeral floral arrangements and muted sympathy cards, because op-eds and paperwork felt like weapons. The matron at the front clerk's desk was a woman who'd eyed them like kids with dirt on their knees for years. Now her face wore exhaustion. Her eyes widened when Opal produced the fur and scrap. The sheriff was overworked, all jaw and worry, cigarette stubbed and hollow-eyed. He took the evidence like it was a small animal, and then, with the slow politeness of someone trying not to look at a wound, told them to stay inside, to lock their doors, to not be heroes. The teens didn't go home. They set up a watch from Hayes's garage, lanterns borrowed, a radio with a slightly warped reception, a mixtape playing on loop because silence felt worse. They tied fishing line along the yard like a cheap alarm. Blair smeared grease on a shotgun shell and balanced it on a trap they'd found in a hardware catalog. Ridiculous, hopeful theater. Night became expectation, their ears tuned to the smallest sounds. A stray cat, a truck gear grinding, a neighbor's pan clinking. They joked to keep the terror from settling. Nico imitated slasher movie lines. Blair quoted rules of how to survive, until the lullaby started low and far, that fractured humming that had become a needle under their skin. "Hayes," Opal said, voice thin. If she's the thing." Hayes couldn't finish. He rubbed his thumb along the seam of his sneaker, trying to feel something mundane. When he tugged his sock up, his hand brushed a warmth on his ankle. He frowned. A nick. At first he thought it was from the fence, a tiny scrape. Then he froze. The nick had two parallel marks, thin and shallow, but so close together that they looked like beginnings of a puncture. Blood welled between them, dark and quick. "Hayes?" Nico's voice was a thread. He crouched, flashlight blades slitting the dark. Hayes shook his head as if to clear it. probably from when I hopped the fence." He laughed, a brittle sound that broke. Opal leaned in, whispering, and her face tightened. "That's not fence rust. Those are tooth marks." Hayes stared at his ankle like it belonged to someone else. The blood on his skin soaked into the cuff of his sock, and the warm smell, metal beneath copper, filled the garage like a promise. Behind them, the radio crackled. A caller reported a body found near the fairground, disemboweled, a smear of fur across the chest. The voice on the radio said the scene looked staged, a chuckle of disbelief, then silence, then the sound of tires on gravel. Hayes looked up, and for a stupid second he thought he saw the moon peel itself away from the clouds and stare right through him. The hairs on his arms prickled, the nick on his ankle stung with a small feral heat. Somewhere at the edge of the cul-de-sac, a dog howled long and wrong. Hayes felt something shift under his skin like ice melting into oil. He hadn't realized he was shaking until Opal's hand found his and squeezed. He wanted to laugh and vomit at once. "Let's go find a doctor," Blair said, voice flat, already moving. "Now!" Hayes stood, the garage light catching the wet trail of blood down his sock like a faint comet. He laced his shoe with hands that didn't obey him. When he straightened, the garage door's shadow stuttered, just a flash of movement at the edge of the light, a pair of yellow eyes reflected in the window like pennies glinting in a gutter. Hayes blinked. The eyes were gone. He felt the teeth in the nick throb in time with his pulse. He swallowed hard, and, in the small private cavern behind his ribs, something cold and old answered like a bell. The sound of the dog's howl stretching into the fog. The moon was a coin stuck behind gauze. It hung there like a promise nobody wanted. Hayes sat on the edge of the tub in Opal's bathroom because bathrooms were practical and small and had a lock. The light above the mirror buzzed. The tiles were cold under his bare feet. He kept rubbing at the tiny punctures on his ankle as if doing so could smooth time back into place. Opal paced while Blair rifled through a first aid kit with the exaggerated care of someone pretending to be competent. Nico sat on the closed toilet, handheld console abandoned, eyes on Hayes like he was watching the beginning of some terrible science experiment. "Rule 1, Opal said, steady as a metronome. "No one goes outside alone, no exceptions." "Rule 2, Blair added, sharper. "No driving. If someone starts, whatever, don't let them behind the wheel." Nico swallowed and said, "Rule 3, if anyone shows bite marks, scratches, deep odd wounds, medical attention, like now." Hayes laughed once. It sounded like a hiccup. "Doctor will look at my ankle and say, 'Kid, you scraped your fence.' Then we show him this." Opal held the scrap of scarf, the clump of fur in wax paper like a small, terrible trophy. Their faces were lit by the bathroom's yellow bulb, and something colder glinted in the glass behind them. Hayes stripped his sock down, and the small punctures glistened, two perfect twin dents. The skin around them was already bruising purple. He flexed his toes and hissed. A wave of nausea rolled through him. That was not hunger, not quite pain. It felt older. It felt like memory. "Do you feel different?" Nico asked, voice too quiet. Hayes closed his eyes. When he opened them, the whites looked like paper under a harsh desk lamp. "It's like sound is louder," he said. "Like the icebox in my throat is humming." He swallowed, and his Adam's apple jerked. "And the lights hurt." He squinted at the bulb and flinched. The bathroom seemed too bright and too small and too sharp. Opal caught his hand. Her grip was fierce. We keep him fed, soft food, salt, also blanket him at night. She sounded ridiculous and perfect. We make a list of normal things: water, bandages, sugar. Normal things make odd things seem less odd. Blair stared at Hayes's ankle again and said, "If he changes, we lock him in the basement. No windows, no sharp things, no mirrors." Hayes barked a laugh that wasn't a laugh. "You sound like a horror movie checklist." He rubbed his jaw. A muscle under his cheek twitched, faint, not under his control. Outside, somewhere in town, someone cursed and a car horn bleated. Ghost Rest was waking into something mean. The radio in Opal's living room whispered news, body count rising, sheriff asking for calm, residents told to stay indoors. The words slid like oil across tile and didn't stick. They tried to sleep. They didn't. At midnight, a thin, ragged wind pulled at the eaves. Hayes's breathing changed in the way animals breathe, short, shallow, like off-key music. He wandered to the window and pressed his forehead to the cool glass. The moon painted his face a sickly silver, and for a moment Opal thought she saw the pupils widen, taking in the light like a camera lens. "Don't look at the moon," she whispered. But it was already there on his skin, a pale bruise. The last sentence of her plea fizzled like a match. Then the hunger came. It started as a whisper behind his teeth, a small hollow that wanted more than food. Hayes went to the kitchen and opened the fridge like an undersea diver, reaching, searching. He pulled out raw meat from the bottom drawer where co-opting fingers had stashed it. His fingers trembled as he held the slab, breath hooting against the fat. Opal grabbed his shoulder. No, you can't." She smelled metal and iron and the sick, sweet sting of fresh blood, and it almost made her swoon. He set the meat down on the counter and backed away as if the slab had bitten him. His hands were shaking so hard the plate rattled. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said. It was a vow and a prayer. Blair paced with a shotgun someone had loaned them from the hardware store, ridiculous, heavy plastic smell in his nostrils. "We need rules," he said aloud, to make them sturdy. "If Hayes gets worse, if he can't control it, we sedate him, we restrain him, we don't," his throat closed, "we don't let him go anywhere near other people." They made a list. They taped it to the kitchen wall like a spell. No alone time. Cold compresses for agitation. No mirrors. Bind wrists if necessary. Use cloth, not wire. Call the vet. No, call a doctor. If he becomes violent, immobilize and wait daylight. They laughed once at number 5, a brittle, horrible laugh, and then they cried for a little while in the kitchen light, because grief does not wait politely for clarity. Hours crawled by. Hayes's senses sharpened. He could hear the neighbor's water pipes like a distant creak. The moth trapped under the porch light sounded like a helicopter. He could smell the glue on the Halloween decorations down the street. He could pick out the metallic note of 100 small animal scents layered into the fog. At 2:13 a.m., Opal's mixtape clicked and the cassette stopped mid-track with a soft, angry pop. The radio in the living room spat a static-laced report. More bodies at the fairground, eyewitnesses describing a woman, hair long and wild, and a shadow that moved wrong. The announcer's voice was brittle. Hayes's mouth tasted of iron and longing. He bent to touch the punctures and his fingers came away slick. He looked at his nails and saw a smudge of dark there that wasn't just blood, It was the smear of something that wanted to belong. "You okay?" Opal asked, and he nodded because answering felt like being tethered. Then his head snapped toward the doorway as if someone had flicked an invisible string. He listened to a sound the others didn't hear at first. A soft padding like cloth across wood, a tiny thump outside on the porch. Blair peered through the peephole. The porch was empty. A wind moved the plastic pumpkin's mouth. The padlock on the gate whispered. The feeling of being watched skittered up their spines. Hayes inhaled, and the room went still. His jaw worked on its own, teeth pressing together. A low moan escaped him, not a word, but the beginning of one. Opal's hand flew to his mouth. "Hayes, don't," she breathed. He backed away. "She's home," he said, voice a shuddering whisper. Outside, a car door slammed. Tires squealed like a nail against glass. Someone, two someones, moved in the driveway. A pair of lights cut through the curtains like twin knives. Nico mouthed, "Mom," as if the word were a beacon. A key turned in a lock and footsteps, deliberate, heavy, crossed a porch. Hayes grabbed for them then, not a grip of strength, but a soft, pleading tether. "If she comes in, don't let her. His words frayed and dropped. The front door swung open with a soft breath of air. A shadow filled the entryway, taller than it had any reason to be. Something about it hunched and leaned, and the scent of raw meat and wet fur poured in with the cold air. Opal backed toward Hayes, eyes wide. "Who is that?" A voice, too close, familiar and wrong, sang a line of an old lullaby under its breath, and the shape's head tilted. The friends couldn't see the face, save for a flash where moonlight cut past the curtain. The outline of a jaw worked like an animal's. The thing in the doorway smelled of wet leaves and iron and the small, obscene pleasure of hunt. Hayes made a noise that might have been a command or a plea. He moved to the door as if in two minds, half drawn to that voice, half terrified of it. The first hair on his arm rose like wheat. His hands shook with a new knowledge. Opal lunged. She slammed the door shut, slamming every lock they'd jammed into place. The deadbolt clanged, the chain scraped. The figure outside tapped the wood with a slow, knowing rhythm, 3 taps, then pause. A woman's hum curled the words of Hayes's childhood lullaby into something else, something cracked. For a breathless second, something battered the door from the other side. Knuckle-meeting wood, a weight that wasn't quite human. The house shuddered. Hayes pressed his palm flat on the door as if he could feel through the wood. Tears cut tracks down his face, hot and quick. "Mom," he started, and Opal's hand covered his mouth because the name felt like a rope thrown toward a pit. The tapping stopped. The house held its breath. Then, from somewhere under the ticking of a far clock and the small breath of the mixtape, Hayes heard a sound that made every rule they'd written seem thin. A small wet snuffle at the base of the door, like a nose testing the seam. Something outside raised its head and howled once, a single human-wrenched note that split the night and rolled over the houses like thunder. They said the moon would finish what the town started. The moon hung low and full, huge as a coin, and Ghost Rest waited with hands over its face. The plan was stupid and perfect and sewn together from whatever the four could find. Oil lamps, a busted chain from the garage, the funeral parlor's old floodlight they'd rolled out like a wheeled altar. The idea was simple: bring light, force a standoff, trap the thing that had been a mother in one place so they could see it for what it was, and end it before it ended them all. They baited the trap at Hayes's cul-de-sac. A rig of car headlights and torches made a hard pool of daylight on the wet pavement. Opal held the radio like a talisman. Blair had the shotgun slung across his back like a scar. Nico kept checking the VCR cam they'd duct-taped to a mailbox, the static-filled lens catching anything that moved in the fog. Hayes moved slower than before, jaw set, hands steady. The bite on his ankle had closed, but the skin was puckered like a wound remembering a tooth. When the humming began, soft at first, a lullaby folded wrong, everyone tensed. From the dark between houses, something stepped into the light like a bad memory. She was all wrong and all almost remembered. Hayes's mother, coat torn, hair wild, face wet with something that gleamed like oil. Where her mouth should have been there was a suggestion of teeth, long and pearly, and when she opened it, the breath that came out smelled of iron and fox fur. The neighbors watched from curtained windows like ghosts who worried too much about politeness to move. The sheriff stood by his cruiser with hands empty. His jaw worked as if chewing a curse. "Hayes," she crooned, and the sound bent like wire. The thing's head tilted and the world narrowed to the sound of a name. Hayes stepped forward as if tethered by threads of childhood. He wanted to believe. He wanted the mother who'd held him through storms. Opal's fingers dug into his shoulder like nails. "Hayes, don't," she hissed. The thing lunged with speed that made the wet street blur. For a second, it was only a shadow, a flash of fur and teeth. It hit the light and flinched, the beams catching scales on its skin the way moonlight ribbons the back of a snake. The fight was animal and intimate and wrong. The beast moved with a woman's memory, but its hands were claws, its rage a language of hunger. Blair fired the shotgun more as a punctuation than a plan. The blast roared, and a spray of feathers and splinters and whatever had been in the air answered with a howl that shredded itself. The neighbors screamed, and someone threw a firecracker into a pile of dry leaves. The world smelled like gunpowder and fried paper and fear. In the scramble, a figure stepped from the shadows. Mr. Greeley, the grinning man who ran the hardware store, the man who'd always helped the youth get screws and rope and cheap batteries. He moved with the lithe wrongness of a thing that had been remade. Before anyone could shout, his teeth found Hayes's forearm like a vice. Hayes yelped, the sound cutting through the frenzy. Opal lunged and punched Mr. Greeley back, teeth clacking like broken glass. He spun and snarled, a human face ripped into something else, and for a second the group forgot the mother thing as survival tightened around Hayes's bitten limb. Get him off," Nico screamed. Use the chain! Use the chain!" They did. They hauled Mr. Greeley away, jammed a chain across his body, and he thrashed until the world blurred. The flashlight's beam carved his eyes into coin slits. He spat something that might have been a curse or a name. Hayes staggered, the skin at the bite swollen, angry, and dark. Blood was slick and hard and hot on his sleeve. He wanted to laugh and to throw up and to fling himself at the mother and be held and be torn and be saved. He wanted to rip the world open and find the ordinary again. Opal wrapped his arm in a sheet and bound it tight as if bindings could be prayers. Blair pressed gauze over the bite while Nico poured cheap vodka into Hayes' mouth because it was what they had, and because tiny rituals feel like medicine when the real cures are gone. "Drive him to the hospital," the sheriff said, but his voice was hollow, the sentence more suggestion than order. "No," Opal said before Hayes could. Her voice was small, and everything in it trembled. "We can't risk the drive. Not with her out there. Daylight kills." Her words ran into the static of the radio like rain on a cassette. They dragged Hayes into the garage and slammed the door, bolting it. They nailed planks over the windows and looped the chain across the door. Inside, they laid him on the workbench under a bright, buzzing halogen lamp. The harsh light carved his features into a map of colors and bruise and blood. Outside the house, steel met fur. The mother thing pressed her weight against wood and shouted something that broke into an animal wail. The neighborhood, burgers cooling on porches, party streamers limp in light drizzle, saw its normal peel like varnish. Time telescoped. Hayes's breathing hitched, then steadied, then it didn't. The bite on his arm smoked with a fever that was not hot, but ancient. He thrashed and clawed at Opal's hands when she tried to give him water. His eyes fluttered, and for a moment the pupils split into slivers and the whites flashed raw. Opal's fingers were blood-slick and shaking. Blair found matches and lit a circle of kerosene-soaked rags just outside the garage window. "If she comes in, if anything comes through, light," he said, voice raw. "Light and fire." Nico shoved a crudely taped VCR cam in Hayes's face like a witness. Look at me," he said, the way someone talks to a drowning man to stop him slipping. Hayes's eyes met Nico's, and for a sliver of a second he was only Hayes, bruised, small, terrified. He mouthed something like, "I'm sorry," and then his face contorted into a snarl that was not his. Opal leaned so close she could feel his breath, hot, tinny, metallic, and she saw at the corner of his mouth the start of something. A tooth too long, a pink line where the gum should be neat. She felt her stomach drop and, like a small stab of holy cruelty, laughed, sharp and ugly. "You're not losing you," she whispered. "You're getting worse, but you're still you. Hold on." He clutched her hand as if it were a cliff. The howl outside rose and broke into a chorus. Neighbors flinging open doors, men lifting garbage can lids as if they were shields, a woman sobbing in tongue and prayer. Through the thin slats of the garage, light shoveled in, blinding, unnatural. The thing, Hayes' mother, reared back from the window like a beast hurt by holy water. She pawed the door and lashed out, nails scraping across wood. For a breath she seemed human, tilt of head, a flicker of memory, and then the animal reclaimed her. "You have to keep him awake," Blair said. His hands were shaking so badly he could hardly wrap gauze. "No sleep, no dark, keep lights on, keep him talking." They made a list of mundanities. Sing, tell stories, read something, chew gum, drink water, play the same mixtape over and over. They did everything dumb and human and ridiculous. They recited commercials. They named their least favorite teachers. They argued about whether VHS or cassette was the better medium for evidence. Laughter curdled and came back like a fever. Hours folded. The thing outside thudded and scratched and moaned in human syllables between teeth. Dawn bled at last along the hedgerows, pale, then pink, then a thin, ashamed yellow. The mother thing froze at the first light like an animal caught mid-leap. She lunged toward the sun as if to bite the horizon, and then she staggered, then crumpled into a heap of ragged woman and fur. Her head lay in a pool of twilight and house-swept dust. Sirens screamed once in the distance, then a second time. They had done it. They had kept Hayes from falling into the deeper dark. They had, in the end, not let him be eaten by moonlight. But the cost balanced in ways that do not tally. Mr. Greeley was bound and unconscious but breathing. His eyes rolled with something that did not belong. The mother, dead, dying, or whatever, had left a raggedness in everyone. The sheriff moved through the street, counting bodies and people whispering like static. They released Hayes when dawn thickened into a miserable, ordinary morning. He was alive. He coughed and blinked and focused. He smiled once, small and crooked, and then vomited, and the taste of iron filled his mouth. Opal wiped his face with shaking hands. "You okay?" she asked, and he squeezed her fingers, human pressure, and whispered, "Yeah." The word was a thin reed, but real. They walked back through the neighborhood, and the evidence stacked like luggage. Furs, scraps, the torn scarf, blood on porch steps. People gathered, eyes bright and raw, either with relief or the hard shine of those who had not slept and would not again. Later, in the quiet, after the ambulance lights had gone and breakfast radios muttered about curfews and control, Hayes stood by the cemetery fence. Opal came to his side and wrapped an arm around him. He leaned into her like a boy who'd found his hand held by someone who promised not to let go. He rolled his sleeve up. The bite marks on his arm were there, healed in lines like faint scars. But when the sun hit his skin a certain way, if you squinted and tried to imagine the worst, there was a tiny dark ridge near his gum line where a tooth refused to sit straight. He smiled, and the corner of his mouth flickered oddly, just for a blink. Opal saw it. She did not say anything. She took his hand and shoved it in her pocket like a secret. They'd survived the night. They'd stopped one horror. They'd failed at stopping the rest. The sheriff's deputy came calling later with a list of townsfolk who had been bitten or scratched, some missing, some dead, some dragged into the fog. Someone had found a corpse half hidden in the hay at the fairground, but the smile on its face was wrong, too wide, too patient. As they walked home, the mixtape in Opal's sleeve kept clicking through songs, the same chorus winding and winding until it felt like a heartbeat. On the porch, a neighbor waved slowly, a small, awkward human wave. The town of Ghost Rest would stitch itself back together. It would hang new lights, and for a while they would look less crooked. But out at the edge of town, behind hedges and under the owl's watch, something else had tasted the moon and learned its hunger. Hayes turned and saw a pair of kids across the street playing with a loose dog. The dog tilted its head at him, and there was, for a single breath, a knowing in the animal's eyes. Hayes felt his jaw ache and the old hunger curl like a secret at his ribs. He put a hand to his mouth and tasted iron and fear and something like a promise. Opal squeezed his hand. "We keep the rules," she said, low and fierce. He nodded. "We keep them." They walked toward the house with daylight softening the world. Behind them, a curtain twitched on a second-floor window, and a silhouette watched them go. A neighbor, perhaps, or someone else learning to hide teeth with a smile. The camera, old, steady, VCR-eyed, wobbled on its mailbox mount, recording everything it had been asked to keep. The final frame, the one that would press itself into memory like static, wasn't a body or a scream. It was small, almost polite. A smear of dark on a porch step, like someone had placed a thumb there to steady themselves, and the faintest, almost comical crescent of two tiny marks at the edge. They had all survived, but the night had learned and the town had been tasted. The last image the street gave back was a small, hungry grin caught in the crook of a neighbor's mouth as they closed their curtains. Epilogue. The town tried to stitch itself back together with plywood and porch lights. Ghost Rest's Harvest Festival went ahead, half-hearted, jack-o'-lanterns wobbling on stoops like guilty smiles. The sheriff promised safety. The news said isolated incidents. Hayes walked home from school alone, backpack heavy, sky dim with November clouds. He kept his sleeves rolled down now, even when the air was warm. At the corner of Maple Hollow, he paused. A stray dog crouched in the leaves, watching him. Its eyes glowed faint yellow in the dusk. Hayes shifted his jaw, wincing at the ache in his teeth. He touched the back of one molar where the gum had thickened, sore and stubborn. It felt sharper. Wrong. He met the dog's stare. For a second, the world went very still. Breath, heartbeat, air itself holding. Then the animal lowered its head as if in recognition and slipped into the fog. Hayes exhaled, long and shaking. He adjusted his backpack strap and walked on, not looking back. Behind him, a single porch light flickered, buzzed, and went out.